Let me ask you something. Have you or your child ever struggled with taking a test? Does test anxiety become so overwhelming that it feels like your brain wants to shut down? Is that something that your child has said to you? Well, if so, you are in the right place today. Hi, I am Dara, and I am so glad that you have joined me here on my podcast, Designed to Win. Today, I'm going to be talking about test anxiety, what it looks like, and some very practical ways you and your child can do some things to help relieve the anxiety and do the best they can possibly do. So let's just dive right in. Across the U.S. and even in some other countries right now, April is the month that a lot of people dread because it's the time of the year that state testing or the end of the year testing is done to help evaluate what your student has learned and what they have retained for the year. This is when the pressure really begins to build in your child and at home and with the parents. And that pressure often shows up in different ways in each student. You may see things like avoidance for wanting to even talk about it, much less study for it. You may see a lot of procrastination going on, definitely emotional outburst, frustration, or, even shutting down. I had a child who got sick and threw up all the time. Every time you even mentioned the end of the year state testing, he got sick and would get nauseated and throw up. But many students that experience test anxiety, they aren't always as obvious as the being sick to your stomach or procrastinating or the other things I mentioned. Some have anxiety, but it shows up in the form of, well, they know the material and they know the material, but for some reason they can't get it down on a piece of paper. And when they go to take the test, they think they're prepared and they're ready to take it, but they get in there to take the test and they freeze up and they just go blank. Or they get in there and they start taking the test, and every question they second guess. They know the answer, but they second guess the answer. Or they do like one of my children did and rush through it just to get it done and over with. Whether they know the answers or not, they just circle in the little bubbles and do it just to get it done. And parents often begin to wonder, why can my child do the work at home, but they can't seem to take a test? They know that their child knows the material, but they go to take a state test and it looks like they haven't learned anything the entire year. I know what that's like because I've been on that side of it as a parent, and I've also seen it on the side of an educator, a teacher in the classroom giving these tests. Test anxiety, honestly, is not just about taking the test. It really is about what is going on inside your kiddo, inside your student. For many students, especially those with learning differences, which I know exactly what that's like, processing may take a lot longer for them, and that's okay. Reading can feel very overwhelming to them, especially if they're dyslexic and that's an area that they struggle with. Or writing responses becomes an added pressure for a kid with dyscalculia or somebody that has problems with handwriting, or just being able to write things down when you feel under pressure, your brain freezes up and you can't think of anything to write. And the other thing is the time limit. The time limit on test becomes stressful for kids. If they know that they have a time limit of 3 hours to get a test done, they are stressed out about that time, the entire test. And when you develop all these stresses and all these worries and all these things that I mentioned, your brain begins to shift into what we call survival mode. And when that happens, the memory becomes harder to access. We've all probably been there at some time. You go in to take that test, whether you're in grade school or high school or even college. You go in to take a test and your memory becomes, you start having all these anxieties and your memory becomes harder to access. You think, how in the world do I not know this? I know this, but it won't come out of my head. Your focus decreases and you start thinking about that clock on the wall or somebody tapping their foot, or you know what I mean, all those things. And your confidence just drops down to the floor. So even if your student knows the material, they just may not be able to show it. It's not a lack of ability on your child's part. It's just the response of being overwhelmed. And I think as educators sometimes and administrators, they tend to forget that. Finding other ways to test a child sometimes is better. Well, this is where something deeper begins to happen when the confidence drops down. Students often start believing these things and they start telling these things to themselves in their head. They'll say, I'm just not good at taking tests. I never have been good at taking tests. I've always messed this up. I've never been able to do this well. Or I'm just not smart enough to do it. And all of those thoughts just help to fuel the anxiety even more. But one of the most important things that we can do to help kids to understand that testing does not define their intelligence or their value. So I hope that you all understood that. Let me repeat it again. To tell your child that the test that they are taking does not define what they know, what they understand, what they've retained, or the value of themselves. It doesn't change that at all by taking those tests. They are so much more than the score on that test, and they need to understand that. When we begin to shift our students' thinking, our kids' thinking, we begin to reduce the pressure that they feel about taking a test. So let's look at some practical strategies now that we've talked about some of the obvious things or some of the things that we didn't even realize that were showing stress and were stressors for students. Let's just talk about some practical strategies that we can do to help them with this. So number one is to create structure in preparation for the test. Help them to study in small, manageable chunks, not everything at once. This is one thing that I have seen over the years that a lot of students do. They think if they just study and they cram and they cram and they cram and they sit and cram for hours and hours on end trying to retain information or study for a test or prepare for a test, that they're going to do so much better by doing that. But I have found, especially with students that have ADHD or dyslexia or autism, or do have problems with, most of them do, with executive function skills, it's better if they study in 15-minute to 20-minute increments. Study for a little bit and then take a break and then come back to and study, because you can retain better when you just do it in small chunks and it doesn't feel as stressed and as overwhelming. And I've seen this time and time again with students that I have coached and I have taught and I have worked with over 25, 30 years. So that's number one, create structure in your preparation. Number two is practice in a safe way. So have your students walk through what they do know. They know a lot more information than they think that they do, but just have them talk about it. Talk about what they know. The more they can verbalize what they know and just talk with you about, maybe it's history, or maybe it's science, or maybe it's one of the subjects that they think they don't know well. But if you talk about English, or you talk about something in English they've learned, or how they write, or any of those things, just let them explain their answers out loud, what they know, how they know it. Because when people realize they can talk about the information that they have learned and what they know, they realize that they know a lot more than they can put on a piece of paper sometimes. And so this helps to build a lot of strong confidence in students. I have seen this time and time again. I have even given students verbal tests before because they were so unable to put it down on a piece of paper. But when I asked them the questions that were on a test, they could verbally tell me what the answer was. It was just getting it on that paper while they were actually taking the test. It's very interesting. All right, so let's go on to the third strategy I have for you today, and it's reduce the pressure. It's really important that we remind them that they don't have to be perfect. There's no expectation for them to make a perfect score on the test, and they just need to do the best they can possibly do. Just go in there and do the best they can do. And if they've done the best they can do, then they will really do a lot better on the test than they think they can. And number 4 is the last one I'm going to give you today, is that some students will benefit from accommodations or modifications or adjustments when they do take tests. And it's really important that those things be considered. And for some students, it's like a huge relief and a huge relief of stress off of them, that they can be able to be in a very quiet environment, that there's not ticking noises around or loud noises around, or they're not near a place where it's not super quiet. Sometimes just moving them into a space where they might be in a smaller group setting where there's only a few of them in the testing area helps them to feel less overwhelmed. Just taking time to teach them some calming techniques like breathing. There can also be considerations for different testing approaches. And I think I've mentioned this previously at the beginning of the podcast. I've done that before, where we have given students the opportunity to give answers on a test verbally and give verbal responses, to do one-on-one testing with a student where they come in before or after school to do testing. Now, on some of the state testing, they can do more of one-on-one, but they can put a student in a classroom with a few other people and do testing with them and allow them to have things read to them where they understand them better, and give them opportunities to be able to give answers back to a teacher or the proctor for the test. And allowing students to be able to give hands-on demonstrations of the things that they know. Sometimes in science environment, they're able to give more of a hands-on demonstration to be able to explain and do things rather than just write it down on a piece of paper. So those are some of the things that you can advocate for your students to be able to do when it comes to state testing. It just depends on the situation, but those often have to be put into a IEP, an individual education plan for a student as well, for accommodations for testing and modifications for testing. So as we're nearing the end of the podcast today and what we've talked about, I just want to give you a lot of encouragement. So at the beginning, we talked about some of the things that you can identify about stressors and things that come up for your student in testing, getting ready for and knowing that state testing is coming up. But then I also gave you some practical strategies of some things that you can think about to consider as you're working with them to prepare for the state testing. What students need to understand is they can release some of the pressure. They don't have to carry all the anxiety that they are carrying around with them, that they're very capable of taking the test and doing what they need to do. They just need to have some support and understanding that they're just struggling with some of these areas, but with some structure and tools and just encouraging them, like I mentioned, to tell them that they can do this. They don't have to be perfect. They can just do the best they could do, and to just put some of those support things in place for them if they need them. But most importantly, to encourage them that they are more than capable of doing this. So if this episode has really resonated with you and helped you to understand maybe some more things about your child and what they may be experiencing, it may be things that you as a parent haven't noticed with your own child. I'll be honest, sometimes I didn't, and I had kids that had dyslexia, apraxia, autism that I raised, that I dealt with a lot of this with my own kids. So, and every once in a while, I would kind of miss it. And, we get busy and we sometimes don't pay attention and we don't realize, oh, it's this time of the year and our student is having this struggle. So, if you've enjoyed this episode, I hope that you've gotten some things out of it that will help you through this time of the year and help your student through this time of the year. But I'd love for you to follow me on my podcast, and there'll be a lot more episodes coming up between now and the end of the school year that I hope will be supporting you and helping you through the rest of the remainder of the school year. And I'd also like to invite you to join the online community that I have that's designed to win, and it's for special education families. And it's just a support group, basically, to get on there. I post things on there, information on there that can help you with supporting your child with learning differences, whether it's about questions that you have or just being able to share experiences that you've had that you might want to share with somebody else that has helped you to be able to navigate these things. And right now, if you have any other ideas or any things that you have used that I didn't mention, please feel free to go onto the community or even on to the podcast or website and post those information that somebody else might be helped through the things that you and your family have gone through. So feel free to do that. I'd love to hear from other people and hear what you've experienced and what you've gone through and what has worked for you. So next week, we're going to be talking about something that a lot of families are facing as we move towards the end of the school year. And that is basically, how do you survive till the end of the school year without stress and overwhelm? And we're just going to talk about surviving to the end of the school year. Some of y'all are in a place of trying to play catch up. And I mentioned that in a previous podcast a few weeks ago about how to do that. You can go back and listen to that podcast. So I want to thank you very much for being here with me today. I'm so glad that you were here. And I just ask that you remember that as you're going through this month and to the end of the school year, just remember that every student, your child and mine, every one of them has strengths. They have great value of who God made them to be. And every one of them was designed to win. Until next time.